EA's first attempt at creating a mixed martial arts game was considered a minor success with EA MMA. Featuring fighters not contracted by the UFC, EA tried to produce a game that blended the control scheme of its Fight Night series into the digitized world of MMA. The results were mixed at best, leaving some players put off and disappointed. So there was a certain level of trepidation when it was announced that EA would be creating the first UFC game for the 8th generation, simply titled EA Sports UFC. The demo provided a good glimpse into what to expect, only for gamers to discover how bare bones the actual release proved to be. EA's first attempt played like EA MMA with the THQ UFC Undisputed control scheme that just didn't blend well for some reason. While updates made the game better, by the time EA Sports UFC reached its potential, gamers had moved on. EA promised to have listened to gamers, looked to improve on almost every aspect from the original, and even gave fans of MMA games a chance to experience some things never seen in an MMA game. After being somewhat underwhelmed with the initial release of EA Sports UFC, I came into the sequel with a sense of apprehension, and to a certain extent, an expectation for disappointment. Unlike the first EA UFC game, UFC 2 provides a good amount of things to entertain oneself both online and offline. After completing the mini-tutorial where the player takes control of Robbie Lawler to finish the digitized version of his incredible welterweight championship defense against Rory McDonald during UFC 187, UFC 2 introduces the amount of variety one can take part in, including career mode. Like many career modes in the past, UFC 2 allows for the player to create his or her own fighter, with the ability to have a female career this time around, and fight to the top of whatever division of 10 the player chooses. There are also a pair of online modes featuring the journey toward championship glory, ranked competition, and ultimate team mode, with the latter focusing on building a stable of created fighters to take on other players who have created everything from digitized versions of themselves to hulking tattooed monsters. Almost everything UFC has to offer is associated with a trophy or achievement, giving the player an incentive to test out everything EA has provided with this iteration. As of this review, after 4 or so dozen hours of playing both offline and online, finishing career mode, grinding an ultimate team, and creating my own fighters, I found myself patiently waiting for those final few card packs connected to the actual UFC live events to come into my possession, so I could have a stockpile of cards and attain the last trophy necessary to gain that Platinum trophy. Thanks to a couple of online victories in the recently added live events competition mode, to complement the offline live events mode, I was able to achieve Platinum status. Developers promised to have listened to its fans and worked toward producing something greater than everything that came before it. While in ways the developers did live up to its grandiose claims, they also fell short in certain areas. Case in point, the gameplay itself. Attempting to evoke the spectacle, emotion, and unpredictability of MMA, EA's UFC initial gameplay felt like Rock'em Sock'em Robots, as players could utilize the same power punches and kicks over and over again. The grappling system, while similar to the Undisputed games, lacked a certain tightness and surety with everything it did, leaving characters flailing with half-incomplete motions. EA UFC 2 looked to tighten and change and even rid some of the problems in the game's core system. The biggest problem with the previous EA UFC when it came to standing was also what hindered EA MMA's stand-up performance, a lack of power behind the strikes. Unless it was a thunderous roundhouse kick or a jaw-cracking uppercut, strikes in EA UFC felt, looked, and even sounded weak. That is not a problem in EA UFC 2, as each strike landed feels incredibly flush and satisfying. Though there can be a time or two when it appears a punch or a kick hits, but the game for some reason doesn't register it landing. One of my favorite weapons when it comes to fighting games from the sports world like MMA and boxing is the jab. In EA UFC, the jab proved to be a mostly ineffective tool that was easily outdone by power strikes. That is not the case in UFC 2. Working behind the jab can stop power shots, set up bigger strikes, and can be parried without a great risk of the player being knocked out by a single counter-strike, like an opponent would if someone stopped, say, an errant Superman punch. The ability to counter is also greatly improved in this iteration, thanks to the adding of more movement in the game. Players can not only parry by blocking, which too has been improved by making the right bumper and trigger as block buttons for both the head and body. The fluidity of these movements adds a level of depth players thought would be a part of the last game, but just never came into fruition. Tying into the improved stand-up portion are knockouts. The first EA UFC game featured abrupt, unimpressive KOs aplenty. Though there is a good chance for stunning, quick finishes, those usually only come from being competent in how to effectively move the fighter in Counter-Strike, or the opponent just goes crazy and doesn't reserve their stamina. The brutality that comes from landing a perfect knockout blow is incredibly varied and at times unpredictable in the best way possible. As much as one can praise a single facet of EA UFC's gameplay, one can't but be a little disappointed with the other, in this case the grappling system. EA UFC 2 sees a simplifying of the system where all the player has to do is hold the right analog stick in one of 4 directions. Thanks to the HUD, the player is told exactly what position in the clinch or on the ground the character will move if the gamer goes left, right, up, or down with the stick. While it definitely makes things easier and smoother than the last game, the grappling in UFC 2 becomes less of a chess match and more of a game of chance, as completed transitions might not be effective, as the opposition somehow wins the race to a better position. The windows for blocking and or reversing transitions vary and can be hard to get a handle on, especially in the online realm. One aspect of the gameplay that features little to no changes is the submission system. EA UFC introduced the gate system where the fighter on the losing end of the submission would have to move the right analog stick in various directions in hopes of attaining freedom, while the player initiating the submission would try to match their opponent's direction while waiting for a prompt to move the left analog stick in a certain direction to advance the positioning and effectiveness of the whole. There are several variables that make submissions effective in the game, including the character's attributes, stamina, and power level of the intended submission, but the system itself still feels flawed and rigid in execution. Average to very good players will most likely find submissions rare against higher levels of competition, both against the computer and real opponents. Like the ground game, it's hard to find a satisfying way to implement submissions into a game like this that will appease the majority. Unlike EA UFC, UFC 2 provides several modes to give the player an incentive to play the game for days on end. First, there's the aforementioned career mode, where a player can take either a created fighter or a real UFC fighter through the ranks in hopes of not only winning the world title, but also putting off the curse of age and wear and tear fighters all know as retirement. Unfortunately, career mode is as bare bones as one can get. The only thing that makes career mode worth playing is the action itself. Depending on the level of difficulty chosen, career mode can be a thrilling experience bell to bell that can feature truly impressive opponents and fights. Sadly, it's everything else about the mode that is lacking. Other than doing training sessions by completing the same skill challenges one can complete in a separate tutorial in the menu, there's nothing else. There are little things meant to make career mode more dynamic, like short training sessions boosting popularity, the only thing that can push back the bar that visibly represents just how close a fighter is to retiring, and the fighter challenge. Optional challenges for specific fights, such as land 20 shots from the clinch in one round, that reward you more fans. These additions don't add much to the longevity of career mode. Also for offline players is the new knockout mode, which is exactly what it sounds like. Players can pick 2 fighters to stand up and go to war. No grappling allowed. In the UFC version of Horse, where each player has a specific number of bars representing one's health. With each significant shot comes a dwindling of the bar until one character is in a fetal position. Knockout mode is a fun party mode where friends can sit around and see who goes down first. Why knockout mode wasn't offered online is beyond comprehension, as it would have been incredibly fun online just as much as it is offline. And then there's the online portion of the game. Not shocking, quick play and ranked online modes return, with the latter focusing on the player not only winning titles, but also moving up numbered divisions, where the higher the division, the harder the real-life competition most of the time. Connections and finding fights are usually strong and easy respectively, though I've witnessed a few laggy encounters, including one resulting in me losing my title. The biggest addition to EA UFC's online offerings is Ultimate Team mode. Ultimate Team allows the player to create up to 5 fighters to battle other online competitors with the intent of moving up the leaderboard, earning coins, and become a champion. Similar to Madden and FIFA's Ultimate Team modes, UFC 2's version features the usage of cards to advance the player's team. But since the player doesn't earn characters with these cards, EA opted to give out moves, attribute boosters, and fitness enhancements, the latter due to the addition of the fitness bar that depletes with each fight. But the crux of Ultimate Team is a pay-to-win mentality that comes with microtransactions. Coins earned via fights are essentially meaningless without buying points with real money to purchase move packs. Thankfully, packs are offered when one levels up their team and or participates in live events mode, a fantastic pseudo-fantasy UFC mode where the player is allowed to bet on upcoming events with the potential of winning card packs depending on who walks away with the victory and in what way during the next UFC event. But to get those real good moves, you have to be either a psychic with your live events pick, dominant in live events competition mode, racking up Ultimate Team wins and leveling up like crazy, or spending extra money on a game that you've already purchased. Why the lowest price pack featuring nothing but low tier moves and boosts couldn't be a coins only purchase just shows how greedy game companies can be nowadays. There's also a terrible limiting in Ultimate Team when it comes to the available divisions. While every UFC weight class is represented in the game, Ultimate Team fighters can only participate in one of 4 divisions: heavyweight, middleweight, lightweight, or women's bantamweight. It's disappointing that a majority of the weight divisions aren't available in Ultimate Team. While the mode is fun simply because you usually aren't fighting overall 100 level created fighters like you would in quick play, it's still incredibly flawed due to a system built on microtransactions and limitations. Other than the custom events mode, where you can create and play your own custom fight cards, and the obvious exhibition mode, there's nothing else when it comes to the mode offering in UFC 2. Create a fighter is worlds better in this game than the last due to the ability to morph a fighter's face, as well as utilizing the game face upload interface. Though not as in-depth as a WWE game, UFC 2's CAF system is really good. The graphics, which were the highlight of the last game, are somehow better this time around, especially when it comes to the created fighters when put side by side with real fighters. The animation can get a little janky at times with clipping and unbelievable falls, but nothing close to the ridiculousness of EA UFC. The commentary, courtesy of Joe Rogan and Mike Goldberg, has the tendency of getting repetitive if you play a lot, but is arguably better than most sports games going today. While my time with EA UFC was mostly fun for a short time, its sequel provides a memorable experience that didn't leave me disappointed and still has me coming back for more. MMA video games are a strange beast, being unlike any other fighting game in the genre. Thanks to the complicated nature of the sport in general, MMA games prove to be more for the dedicated and willing, whom are usually knowledgeable fans. EA Sports UFC 2 looks to negate some of the accessibility problems that had plagued previous MMA games, including its predecessor, to mixed results. Gameplay modifications have produced overall improvements to what happens inside the virtual octagon, but the other means of keeping things fresh and interesting fall short of reaching the promise of what would have helped the bell-to-bell action. Knockout mode is only available offline. Career mode is somehow just as, if not shallower, than the last iteration. Ultimate Team mode is based less on skill and more on chance, with the implementation of randomized card packs and microtransactions. While custom event and live events mode are great additions, they don't make up for the most highly promoted modes being incredibly underwhelming. Thankfully, the strength of the game is in its gameplay, producing the type of fun one would have hoped for while playing the latest UFC game following the pinnacle of MMA gaming, the Undisputed series. For all of its flaws when it comes to the modes, EA UFC gets the gameplay mostly right, and is definitely a good time when you're focusing on simply fighting either offline or online.
Round number 2. Declaring the winner by